Two German shepherds raised together like brothers were playing among trees while their family camped nearby. But the calm of the forest hid something deadly. When a giant python attacked, only one could react, and what he did to save his companion will break your soul. Before we start, subscribe to the channel, give it a like and activate the bell. This story is not just about dogs, it's about true love, instinct and farewells that mark you forever. The sun filtered through the treetops as if the forest breathed light. It was early, but the midday heat was already announcing itself in the humidity of the ground. The sound of birds and the cracking of leaves under the children's boots filled the air with life. Camilla and her husband Martin had decided to camp that weekend with their children in a nature reserve near the Paraná River. It wasn't the first time. They liked to disconnect from the city at least for a couple of days, and their two German shepherds, Bruno and Oso, loved it more than anyone. Bruno was the older one with the darker back and perfect ears, always erect, strong, obedient, protective. Oso, a year younger, had lighter fur, big paws, and a curious and clumsy personality. But if something united them, it was devotion to each other. They played, ran, slept close together. If one went away, the other looked for him. They were inseparable. That morning, while Martin prepared the firewood, and Camilla served Mart in a thermos scratched by the years, the kids played hiding branches, and Bruno and Oso, as always, followed them, watched them, barked, jumped. "Don't go too far," shouted Camilla. "This area has strange bugs." The kids laughed and the dogs ran after them. It was a perfect moment, like those kept in photos that are never taken. Oso was the first to smell something. He stopped dead at the edge of a path hidden by the undergrowth, an acid smell, strange like old meat and rotten leaves. Bruno, who was coming behind, also stopped. He barely growled. "What's wrong, boys?" said the older son, Santiago, 11 years old. Both dogs looked toward the forest, tense. "Let's go that way," said the youngest, Tomas, 7 years old. "No," Mom said. "No," Santiago replied. But it was too late. Oso had gone in and Bruno followed him. The children followed fearfully, shouting their names. In less than a minute, everything changed. A loud shriek, like a muffled moan. Santiago stopped dead, and there he saw it. About 15 meters away between tree trunks, an enormous python was coiling violently around Oso's body, who could barely move. He had his muzzle open, terrified eyes, and his hind legs trembled uncontrollably. Bruno roared like they had never heard him, a brutal, desperate animal sound, and jumped directly onto the snake. "Mom!" Santiago screamed. The kids backed away. Santiago grabbed his brother and ran. Meanwhile, Bruno furiously bit the snake's neck, which hissed and squeezed Oso even more. It was a scene none of them would ever forget. Camilla and Martin ran with a machete in hand and eyes on the verge of terror. When they arrived, they saw Bruno covered in blood, scratched, torn, but still fighting with the snake, and Oso motionless with his tongue hanging out. Martin screamed and began hitting the reptile's body with the machete. It wasn't easy. The python was gigantic, ancient, savage. But Bruno never let go, and when the snake finally gave up, Bruno collapsed to one side, panting, almost without strength. Oso was barely breathing but was alive. Camilla fell to her knees and wrapped him in a blanket. Martin held Bruno in his arms like carrying a son. The entire family was crying. They didn't yet know what they had lost or what they were about to gain. The way back to the campsite was slow and silent. Oso, wrapped in a blanket, barely breathed. His body trembled in Camilla's arms. Martin carried Bruno beside him with an improvised leash, and his gaze fixed on the ground. The dog was still bleeding, had his back scratched and was limping, but he didn't stop looking at Oso, as if he knew that the real wound wasn't his. The children went behind in silence. Tomas didn't let go of his brother's hand. Santiago had swollen eyes but didn't cry anymore, he just watched. In his head a scene repeated over and over again. The snake squeezing, Bruno roaring, Oso whimpering, and he didn't understand how in a second joy could turn to fear. Camilla called the nearest veterinary hospital from the car while Martin drove. At full speed down the dirt road. The connection was weak, but they managed to get them to wait. One bitten, another beaten, one not responding well, Camilla said on the phone, unable to control her voice, broken with emotion. Please wait for us. Bruno was in the back seat panting. His paws were covered with dirt and dry leaves. His ear was torn, but he didn't complain. He just breathed slowly and deeply. Oso, on the other hand, barely made a sound. He went in Santiago's, arms wrapped up with half-open eyes. Every so often he exhaled with difficulty. It was as if his body was absent. At the veterinary clinic, 2 professionals received them immediately. The dogs were separated. Camila wanted to stay with Oso, but they wouldn't let her into the operating room. Martine stayed with Bruno, who could barely stand. He has multiple lacerations and bites on the neck. There may be internal damage, said the doctor, while examining him. Is he going to be okay? Martine asked. The veterinarian looked at him honestly. I don't know. Martine breathed deeply, squeezed his wife's hand. Outside, the children waited, sitting on a blue plastic bench. Thomas hugged himself. Santiago held the drawing he had made days earlier, Bruno and Oso running among trees. Now that paper seemed like a lie. 3 hours passed. Bruno was stabilized, wound cleaning, stitches, painkillers. He had muscle damage but was conscious. When Camilla approached, the dog barely moved his tail. He looked at her with those dark, noble, broken eyes of his. Thank you, champion, she whispered to him, stroking his back. But there was no time for joy. The doctor came out of the operating room with a serious face. The little one suffered prolonged asphyxiation. He's alive but unconscious. His body is fighting, but we don't know if he's going to wake up. Camilla collapsed. She fell to her knees and began to cry without sound. Martine held her. Santiago dropped the drawing. Tomas just asked, "Is he going to die?" No one knew what to say. That night they let them sleep in an improvised waiting room. Camilla didn't leave Oso's side. She talked to him in his ear, told him stories as if he were a child, caressed his chest to feel if he was breathing. Martine fell asleep with Bruno at his feet wrapped in a blanket. The children slept in chairs curled up, and in the middle of the silence of that hospital dawn, only one sound repeated, the labored breathing of a dog fighting to stay and the silent vigil of the one who had already given everything to save him. Dawn brought a strange silence. Not even the birds seemed to sing in the clinic's patio. Camilla continued sitting next to Oso's stretcher. Her fingers gently caressed his fur, avoiding the most sensitive areas. She wore the same clothes since the day before marked dark circles, and one of those looks that only those who haven't slept but also haven't wanted to sleep have. Bruno was on a mattress in an adjoining room with bandages on his hind leg and an IV for the serum. Although injured, he didn't stop lifting his head from time to time, as if he knew his brother still hadn't woken up. Martine talked with the veterinarian. "If he survives," she said in a low voice, "there may be neurological damage. Asphyxiation that prolonged doesn't usually leave the brain intact. But there is hope, yes, but it's thin and it will take time." Martine nodded. He didn't cry, just closed his eyes and returned to the hallway, where the children drew in silence with some pencils the receptionist lent them. Santiago drew Oso lying on the grass, but not sleeping, awake, playing. Tomas drew Bruno with a superhero cape. It wasn't a game, it was their way of understanding what had happened. "Bruno is a warrior," said Tomas, "like in the movies." Santiago didn't respond, but thought the same. On the third day, Camila no longer spoke. She stayed long hours next to Oso without moving, just watched him. She cleaned his muzzle with gauze, changed his blanket, talked to him about the patio, the river, how they would run together again someday. And then it happened, small, tiny, a blink. Martine shouted, "Camila," as if he had just seen a miracle. Martine ran, then the doctor came. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he blinked. "I saw it, I felt it." The doctor approached, talked to him, touched his forehead. Nothing. But minutes later the movement returned, slow, slight. Oso barely moved a paw, and everyone's heart in that room stopped for a second. That night, the family slept for the first time in days. Bruno did too, and although Oso hadn't fully awakened, something inside them was no longer fear. It was faith. The following days were hard. Oso woke up, but didn't walk, didn't control his neck well, had trouble focusing, didn't recognize Tomas's voice and didn't bark either. The doctor was clear. There is damage, but it's not total. He could improve with time or not. Camila listened without blinking, then approached the stretcher and said in a low voice, "We're going to teach you again, my love, from scratch. It doesn't matter how long it takes." Bruno was discharged. He still limped but was strong. They took him home carefully, and upon arriving, the first thing he did was run in his way toward the corner where he slept with Oso. He smelled the ground, searched, waited, and then stayed there lying down as if he was still waiting for him. A week. Later, Oso was carried home in arms. He didn't walk, but when he entered through the door, Bruno got up and whimpered with emotion. He didn't bark, just rested his muzzle on his brother's and stayed there without moving, because sometimes reunion doesn't need words, just presence. The house no longer sounded the same. Despite the return, despite having both dogs again under the same roof, joy seemed to have been trapped in that corner of the forest. Oso slept on a mattress in front of the window with pillows on the sides. He barely moved his neck. Bruno didn't separate from him. He ate when Oso ate, lay down beside him every time they moved him to do exercises, watched him as if he still felt the snake was nearby. Camilla had stopped working for a few days. She divided her time between home physical therapy and consoling the children, but it wasn't enough. Santiago started having nightmares. He woke up crying, sometimes screaming, always the same image. The python squeezing, Oso unable to breathe, Bruno biting desperately. One night, Camilla found him in the hallway, hugging his drawing notebook. "I can't sleep, Mom." She sat beside him and held him in silence. "I'm afraid he'll die while I'm sleeping." Camilla felt her heart tighten. "He's fighting, son, and while he fights, we'll be with him." Santiago nodded, but didn't let go of the notebook. Tomas, for his part, stopped talking about Bruno as the warrior. Now he drew both dogs lying down, sleeping, not moving. When they asked him why, he replied, "Because now they're tired." Martin tried to maintain the routine. He worked during the day, helped at night, but fatigue and frustration were beginning to show. One night, while trying to move Oso's paws in one of the exercises the veterinarian had indicated, he released his hand with more force than normal. "He doesn't react," he said, frustrated. Camilla looked at him. "It's not his fault," she said. "Nor mine. I know, but I also don't know how much longer we're going to endure like this." It was the first time the word limit appeared in the conversation, and it hurt. Days later, the doctor came to do an evaluation at home. She examined Oso, talked to him, touched him, measured reflexes, and asked questions. Camilla waited. "The doctor sighed. "There are very small but real signs. The muscle responds slightly, sensitivity returned to one of the hind legs." So there's a path, but not short or easy." Martin wiped his hand across his face. Camilla closed her eyes. Bruno, lying next to Oso, lifted his head as if he understood. That afternoon, Santiago made a decision. He cut a large cardboard box, lined it with old fabric, and built a kind of cart. He put pillows inside. "So Oso can go out to the garden," he said. He pushed it carefully with his mom's help, and for the first time in weeks, Oso felt the sun on his face again. Bruno followed him all the way. When they reached the patio, he lay down beside him and the wind blew through the lemon tree branches, like a sigh. That night there was something different. Bruno got up from his blanket and with effort moved one of Oso's fabric toys to the mattress. He left it beside him and then lay down again. Oso didn't take it, but he turned his head and looked at it for several seconds. And then, for the first time since the attack, he moved his tail. Barely a minimal vibration, but enough for Camilla to break into tears, because sometimes what's hardest isn't healing, it's not giving up in the attempt. It was a Wednesday when the dusty white pickup truck with tinted windows appeared. It parked in front of the house without warning. Camilla was inside with the children. Martin had just arrived from work and still had the keys in his hand when he saw it stop. A man got out. He wore field pants, worn boots, and a military jacket. He didn't seem lost, nor was he a neighbor. Martin went out to the gate without opening it. "Can I help you with something?" The man barely smiled. "I've come for the dog." Martin tensed. "Which one?" "The one that attacked the python. I saw the story on social media. They described him well to me. Black, straight ears, very well trained, an animal with extreme protective instinct." Martin said nothing. "That dog was mine," said the man. "I trained him. He escaped from me 6 months ago, and I want to get him back." Camilla came out. Santiago looked through the window. Bruno was inside next to Oso, who was sleeping. Martin didn't open the gate. "Do you have documents that prove it?" "No, but I have photos and a scar on his left ear. He got it when he was a puppy by scratching himself on a fence. I bet it's still there." Martin swallowed. Bruno had that scar. The man took a step. "Look, I don't want trouble. I just want my dog back. He was part of a private security group. I lost him in a rural operation. I looked for him and gave up until I saw the video. Your family uploaded a story. I saw his look. I know it's him." Camilla felt her legs trembling. "That dog stayed with us. He saved his brother's life, our children's lives." "I know, but he's mine, and if you don't give him to me, I'll have to go to the police." That night, the house seemed like a ship in a storm. "What if he's right?" asked Camilla. "What if he was his?" "What if he used him for purposes he shouldn't have?" said Martin. "What if he trained him with violence? What if he lost him because he ran away?" Santiago entered the conversation. "Bruno doesn't want to leave." Tomas clung to him. "Bruno is ours." Camilla looked at him, looked at the dog lying next to Oso. "But the law wasn't there when he saved your son," said Martin. Silence. Rain was hitting the windows. Bruno, as if sensing the pain, stood up and approached the door, and with his nose pushed the blanket that covered Oso. He adjusted it over his back. Martin breathed deeply. "He's not leaving." Camilla looked at him surprised. "And if he comes back with papers? Let him come, and if he has proof, we'll fight. But I'm not going to hand him over as if he were a thing. Not after what he did. Not after what he lived through." The next day, Martin went to a lawyer. He explained everything. They showed him the photos, the medical reports, the children's drawings. The lawyer nodded. "No chip, no prior complaint, no concrete proof. He's yours. And if that man insists, he'll be the one who has to prove otherwise." Martin left with a signed paper. He kept it close to his heart like a shield. The white pickup truck came back once more, but no one got out. It just stopped, looked, and left. Camilla locked the door, and that night when Bruno lay down next to Oso, he did it as always in silence, but for the first time Oso lifted his head and rested it on his brother's neck. Martin looked at them from the kitchen and knew that it didn't matter who trained them. What mattered was who chose to stay. Life never went back to being the same. It couldn't, after a snake coiled around your brother, after a man demanding you return the friend who saved your life. One changes, and everything around you changes. But not everything was pain, because after the storm came learning. Oso's rehabilitation was slow but constant. Every day Camilla helped him move his paws, talked to him sweetly, encouraged him with small goals. Move his tail, hold his neck, follow a ball with his eyes. At first he didn't respond, but it didn't matter. Bruno was always there, sitting to one side, silent, firm. Once, while Tomas was showing Oso a toy, Bruno approached and gently pushed it with his snout. It was a simple gesture, and in that instant Oso stretched his paw, the first time he had done it of his own will. It was like seeing a dry branch bloom. Camilla cried and knew that all that effort made sense. Martin installed a ramp at the back exit of the house, so Oso could go out with the cart that Santiago and Tomas had improved. It was no longer a box with wheels. Now it had structure, padding, a small tarp in case of rain. They pushed him every afternoon through the garden, and Bruno, trotting beside him, seemed happier than ever. One Saturday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Tomas bent down to tie his shoelace. Oso, who was watching him from the cart, slowly turned his body and lowered one of his paws. He leaned, trembled, but didn't fall. The boy looked up just in time to see it. "Mom!" he shouted. Oso stood up. Everyone came out. Martine dropped the hose. Camilla came out with hands wet from flour, and Bruno barked. He hadn't done it since the attack. That bark was an explosion of life. The following days were of small miracles. Oso began to walk short distances with help, regained control of his head, recognized voices, responded to petting, and one afternoon, while Santiago was drawing on the porch, Oso slowly dragged himself to his feet and put his head on his leg. "Hello, champion," the boy whispered, petting him. "We missed you." The drawings changed. They were no longer of sleeping or silent dogs. Santiago drew Bruno running among trees, Oso getting up, his family together. Tomás gave that drawing a name, Running Again. One autumn afternoon they decided to return to the forest. Same place, same path. Martine drove calmly. Camilla looked out the window. The children went in the back with Oso between them, wrapped in a blanket. Bruno was on the car floor, serene. When they arrived, the air was warm. The sun filtered through like that time. They got out carefully, walked the safe paths, and then Oso got out of the cart alone. He staggered but took 5 steps, short, clumsy, but his. Bruno waited for him, and then they walked together. They didn't run, but they didn't need to. They had returned. That night in front of the fire, Camilla said, "I think we're not the same anymore." Martine nodded. "Neither are they." And Bruno, lying with Oso between his paws, moved his tail, not by reflex, but from joy. Almost 3 years had passed since that day in the forest. Oso never became the same as before. He walked, yes, played a little, barked softly, but there was something in his look that never completely returned, that spark of clumsiness, of eternal puppy. It was as if a part of him had remained trapped between the coils of that python. And yet he lived and loved, and that was enough. Bruno aged quickly, perhaps from the wounds, perhaps from the weight of the struggle, or maybe because some hearts live more intensely and burn out sooner. He was still strong, still walked beside Martine like a loyal shadow, still slept at Tomás's feet, still protected Oso every time he went too far. But it was harder for him to climb stairs. He slept more, and he no longer barked when the doorbell rang. He just lifted his head and closed his eyes again. One afternoon in the middle of winter, the sky turned grey before its time. Martine and Camilla were preparing hot chocolate. Santiago, now 14, was studying at the table. Tomás was drawing on the floor with his usual notebook. Oso was sleeping on the blanket next to the armchair, and Bruno simply didn't get up. Not with the sound of the kettle, not with the call of his name. It was Tomás who approached first. "Dad." Martine left the cup, approached, knelt, and knew. Bruno had gone, without pain, without noise, like a guardian who, having fulfilled his duty, decides to rest. Camilla hugged him with closed eyes. Santiago couldn't speak. Tomás covered him with his favorite blanket, the one he himself had, chosen when he returned from the veterinarian. And Oso approached limping, smelled his brother's body, and then, in a gesture that tore everyone's soul, he lay down beside him. He didn't whimper, didn't cry. He just stayed there, accompanying him as he had done so many times. They buried him under the lemon tree, there where he used to lie down to watch over Oso. Martine made a wooden cross. Santiago painted the name. Tomás left a drawing, and Camilla planted flowers because beautiful things shouldn't leave completely, only transform. Over the months, Oso found new ways to move, slower, wiser, more silently. But every so often, when the wind blew strong, he would stop and look toward the lemon tree, as if he still felt Bruno there, as if he still heard his breathing. And maybe it was true, because dogs don't die, they just change places. If this story touched your soul, subscribe to the channel, leave your like and share it with someone who loves unconditionally, because sometimes those who teach us most about life don't speak, they bark. Thanks for joining us, and remember, true love never leaves.